What is the worst adult temper tantrum you have seen? Hi Reddit guys, subscribe now, or I will hack your credit card. Stan comes into office and notices Bill has muddy boots propped up on Stan's desk. Stan goes red in the face, leaps onto Bill's desk and proceeds to do what I can only describe as a river dance. "How do you like mud on your desk?" Stan screams. I about hit myself laughing. This is probably the only one that is semi-justifiable. I watched a guy in Walmart flip visit at like 10 PM because some sections at the store were blocked off to be waxed overnight. He had his entire family, which included 4 young kids, and was freaking out at the self-checkout lady over the section being blocked and asking why they didn't do it later in the night, even as she explained that it's a long process that takes literally all night. I used to work at a grocery store. I once watched a lady go into a screaming, swearing fit because we wouldn't let her into the meat department to buy sausages because that section had been blocked off by the fire department. There were 3 or 4 firefighters there, in plain view of the woman, in turnouts, tearing apart one of our refrigerator units because the motor had started smoldering. You could see and smell the smoke. Lady screamed at my supervisor for 5 minutes before one of the firefighters came over and literally told the woman to frick off, which absolutely made my day. Our store manager sent the fire station a giant gift basket afterwards. Good on your manager for sending them a gift basket. That lady sounds absolutely nuts though. I think the guy in my story fricked off on his own. I was leaving Walmart at the time, so next time I was in I asked the lady what had happened. There was a lady here in Oregon that had a bunch of used gift cards she tried to use in a safe way, and they refused them, so she drove her SUV through the store. They didn't even take her license away, and no jail time. I watched my boss lose his freaking mind when another employee wore a collared shirt with his most hated rival football team. I worked part-time for a marketing company promoting food brands many years ago. I made some simple dishes and served them in the store from a food court. This family rushes in with 5+ kids and plunders the samples. After stuffing themselves, the parents ask if it was pork meat in the food. All meat dishes being pork, I said yes. They threw a huge tantrum since they were not allowed to eat pork. You would think that would come up beforehand. Typically people who don't eat particular foods, primarily religious, belief or medical reasons, put more thought into what they are eating before having a problem. Of course, then there are people who want to blame everything on everyone else. I once knew a young girl about 4 who was being raised Muslim. She already knew to check for the words pork and gelatin on nutrition facts labels. She would always ask if something had anything pork related before it was given to her. If a 4-year-old can manage her dietary restrictions, I don't see any reason why adults can't. I agree wholeheartedly. Probably trying to scam. You know, the person that will eat the entire steak before complaining that it was undercooked and want a refund. When I was in customer service, I always said that if my toddler acted better than an adult customer, I'm not putting up with it. And I didn't. People act this way because it has been allowed numerous times in their life. Ugh. I distinctly remember I once had bought a disc-based video game from a local used game shop. I didn't bother to test it because nothing I had bought they had ever not worked. It sat on my shelf 4 months past the return policy's cutoff date. Finally I tested it and it didn't work. I decided, what the heck, let's see if they'll work with me a little since I still had the receipt. Showed up, asked for the manager and explained what had happened, all calmly and acknowledging that I was well past the return policy's cutoff date, but was there anything they could do? She smiled and said of course. I thanked her profusely as she grabbed another disc of the same game and swapped them out for me. She told me that the only reason she was doing it was because I came in so calm and polite. If I had been screaming and throwing a fit, she would have just laughed and told me to get out. I told a lady that I couldn't return her 45-pound bag of dog food that was probably 75% gone. She started screaming that the customer is always right and continued to scream it until we had to ask her to leave. I wish people understood what this saying means. It means that companies that don't cater to the customer will lose business, and this will be reflected in the profits. It doesn't mean that you can walk into a place of business and make any ridiculous demand you want. It's a marketing phrase, not a customer service phrase. During one of our corporate training sessions at the garden center, the guy from HR made that part of his presentation. He had multiple choice starting with "the customer is always, and declared that the answer was not right, and that customers are often uninformed or flat out wrong. The answer was "the customer is always the customer," meaning crazy people happen. We have a radio code to bring all hands if you feel threatened, and if they're aolishly insisting on making stupid purchases, let them experience their mistakes. Because Bamboo doesn't care if the customer thinks it'll stay in one spot, it's going to eat their entire yard anyway. Oh god, you'll empathize with my hell. The woman I bought this house from 4 years ago planted bamboo along the entire side of my yard. I imagine to try and form a natural barrier between her and the neighbors, who ended up putting up a fence the year after she moved out anyway. The result is a behemoth of every growing bamboo that I have spent thousands of dollars and countless man hours attempting to get rid of. I think I may finally have succeeded, but I won't know until it gets a bit warmer up here. Basically fuck bamboo. I never thought I could feel such hatred for a plant. One I mostly saw the aftermath of, but I heard a lot of banging and yelling as I and several co-workers at a small company rushed to the front office to see what was going on. It turned out 2 women had gotten into a full throwing stuff at each other fight, including their chairs. All because one had started a diet and the other had a candy jar on her desk. The other one I saw when I was a kid, and it was a full bout of bat it insane. After a girls softball tournament, one of the parents had a freakout while first and second place teams were lined up and receiving their trophies. My sister was on one of the teams. She ranted, screamed, yelled at the umpires, accused them of fixing the game, threw equipment around, threw dirt, stopped just short of assault, and the umpires and coaches mainly let her rant, even when she was screaming in their faces. Her daughter was standing there, holding her second place trophy, in tears. Finally this woman yelled at her daughter to come on. They were leaving. The daughter clearly wanted to stay, but the lady kept screaming, so the daughter stepped away from the team and walked toward her. The woman tore the trophy away from her daughter's hands and threw it on the ground, the 2 of them heading off into the parking lot. I felt horrible for the girl, and it was one of the first times I realized a lot of adults suck. As a referee for youth sports, this sort of thing happens a hell of a lot more than people think. This is worse than I've ever seen, but not by much. I got accused of being a cheater last week. Not my fault, your team missed like 7 free throws in 4th QTR, and was told I should be ashamed of myself. Favorite line ever from a parent though. If you had another eye you'd be a cyclops. Props to that guy for being creative, instead of yelling the generic "you suck." I think yelling creative insults at referees is a sport on its own. I'm never heavily invested in a sports outcome, but I can appreciate a good zinger. Ref, get off your knees, you're blowing the game. Hey ref, you should check your voicemail, because I think you missed a few calls. This is the only time I've had to walk away from a customer in order to keep my calm and not get fired. I work at a certain video game retailer, and I had a lady try to trade in a PS3 that had pieces chipped off, a large crack in the case, smelled like a cat had used it as a litter box, and had both thumbsticks on the controller chewed through to the little plastic nubs. Well, when I told her I had to put a refurb fee on the system since I couldn't sell it as is, she flipped out on me, cursing up a storm, and calling me a thief for 20 minutes before the manager had to get involved. I even tried to reason with her through asking if she would be happy if I had sold her that particular system, and she screamed at me that no, she wouldn't, but that isn't her problem, and that she is going to get the full value out of her system. It was so bad her own daughter came up to me afterwards and apologized for how her mother acted. Oh, and the lady got her way eventually by having the manager discount the PS4 she was purchasing by the amount of the fee. Man, I knew the manager would cave as soon as I read this. I used to work in a video rental store and we rented out systems with a security deposit. Guy brings back a Wii and 4 controllers completely trashed, and when I tell him he won't get his deposit back he goes apeshit. My manager then refunded the deposit after like 2 minutes of explanation. Facepalm. GRRR. That manager needs to understand that they are only encouraging that kind of behavior. This had happened all the time when I was working in a call center. Customer demands something that I cannot do for him. Freaks out. I repeat what I said a few times. Customer asks for a supervisor. So I get him my supervisor on the phone and suddenly all kinds of extra services are possible apparently. Being a phone drone was infuriating at times. I was driving down a street in Portland following about 5 car lengths behind a small pickup truck. The driver of that pickup started slamming his brakes on for no apparent reason. He kept doing it until he actually slammed them so hard that he slid to a complete stop in the middle of traffic. I was forced to stop behind him and was sitting there wondering if he had something wrong with his truck when he got out in a fury and ran back to my truck red-faced and screaming at me that I was tailgating him. I was completely baffled by this guy. I never tailgate people and I was a generous 5 car lengths behind him on the road. He completely lost his mind and was screaming so high-pitched and senseless that I could no longer understand anything that was coming out of his mouth. I really thought there was something mentally wrong with him, so I rolled my window down and said, "Take a deep breath, man. You're going to have a heart attack." That just made him go more crazy. I've never heard a human voice make such crazy sounds. I wish I had a video camera. So after a minute or so I just pulled over on a side street to try to make sense of everything and let traffic go. He stood right there in the street and screamed and wailed his arms all over for 4 more minutes as cars went around him. As I was sitting there, a car pulled over in front of me and a guy got out, walked over to my car and said, "Did that guy slam the brakes on in front of you?" I said, "Yeah, I have no idea what's wrong with him." The guy says, "He's done it to me twice and I've called the police on him both times." I just called them right now. So both of us sat there until the police arrived, about 2 more minutes, with the guy screaming and throwing a temper tantrum the entire time. The cops had to tase the guy to get him to stop his tantrum. He got arrested and his truck got towed. It was a bizarre and terrible experience. One of the cops told me they had received over 50 calls on the guy and they had arrested him 5 times already. Okay Reddit guys, subscribe now, or I will hack your credit card.